Welcome to Communication Skills Week 9, Reading Skills. The objectives for the unit are the following. We are supposed to be able to define reading and be able to outline how we develop a purpose for our reading. We should be able to explain what the various types of reading entail, be able to expound on the effective reading and comprehension techniques, and also be able to discuss the skill of note-taking. Now, reading involves accessing communication that was passed to us in written form. And written communication can either be, physical, like in hard copy or on paper or other physical material. It can also be electronic, like if we receive an email, it is written communication but in electronic format. So what is reading? So like I've said, it refers to getting stated information from print, to understanding something that is in print form. So you access it, or you get the content of that information from whichever source or from whichever format. Reading can be done either for pleasure or for information. Like when you read magazines, when you read novels and storybooks, you do it for pleasure. But when you are reading notes, or you are reading details regarding a place that you've never visited, then you are reading that for information. And therefore, when you are reading for information, the aim is usually to understand given details, and therefore you read methodically, and so that you can be able to really understand the information that you are reading. The other thing regarding reading for information is that you are able to choose the material that you read. You don't just read anything. You look for specific material so that you can be able to get the information that you are looking for. Now, for you to be able to get the information, there are various ways of reading or reading techniques. The first technique of reading is scanning. And scanning involves looking for very specific information. For example, when we are reading electronic material, it is very easy to do this scanning because you can search. Like when you search for a particular word in a given text, or you search for a particular date or a particular number or a particular place, it could be a particular name or even a particular phrase. So you've got the complete text, but you don't read it word for word from the beginning to the end. You look for a specific item and then you go straight to that point and read the information regarding that particular item that you are looking for. That is what we refer to as scanning. The other technique of reading is skimming, and this skimming is going through or reading through material very quickly. It's like you're passing your eyes through some text, looking for some specific item. So once you get there, that is now when you start concentrating. So the methods of skimming involves moving the eyes quickly over texts. Like you can move your eyes over a paragraph within even less than a minute, and you're able to tell whether it contains what you are looking for or not. Then you also look for any heading or titles. You pay attention to first sentence in each paragraph because it will tell you whether that paragraph is relevant to what you are looking for. And then you also note the first and the last paragraph of the text that you are referring to. So that is skimming. Then the other technique of reading is study reading. Like this one is mostly what we practice in academic reading. So study reading, it has 5 phases. The first one is survey, then question, then read, recall, and revise. Now you can see the last 3 phases all begin with the letter R, and therefore for us to be able to remember quickly the phases of study reading, we use the acronym SQ3R. SQ3R. S for survey, Q for question, and then the 3 R's. The first R for read, the second one for recall, and the third one for revise. SQ3R. So we can look at each of them. The first one is survey, and this one involves getting a general idea of the text before reading. And that is why usually in academic documents we normally have a summary of a document at the beginning. Even in research reports, we normally have a summary at the beginning, so that as you get into the main text, you are able to tell what the document is talking about. So that is the first part, which involves survey. Then the second one, which is represented by the letter Q, is question. And in this part, the reader is supposed to ask questions during the survey. And these questions normally help you to anticipate the finding of answers in the text that you are going to read. Then we go to the 3 R's. The first R is reading, and that is now the actual job of reading the text word for word. Probably at this point you have identified the text that you want to read, and therefore you read it in details. So after you read, you are expected to remember, and therefore the other R is for recall. Remember, we've already talked about the technique of taking short notes when you are reading, so that you can refer to them later when you are revising. Therefore, the last R is for revise. You revise and review the text that you have read. During this process, you are able to pick out any points that may have been left out. And during revision, that is when you also spend more time on any content that you may not have understood initially. So you can read it again and again. You can even do further research on the same, so that you can completely understand the content that you have been reading. Now, normally when we are reading, especially for academic purposes, we usually have the notes that we are given, and we normally say that the notes are a bit shallow. There is much more information that we need that may not be available in those notes, and therefore you need to look for additional reading material. And that is why, like in our case, we normally refer students to textbook titles, and also other material that you can refer to and get the information that you require. So when you are looking for reading material, you should look for material that is associated with the information that you are looking for. They could be textbooks, they could be journals, they could be magazines, and any other type of publication that will give you the information that you need. Now we have in reading materials, we have what we refer to as narrative texts. That is texts that narrates information in a sequential order, in a manner that we can be able to follow up, so that at the end of it, we are able to refer to the content that we have read. And the narrative texts are usually very common when it comes to reading. The sequence is normally in the form of a story, and therefore it catches the interest of the reader in a very easy way, and therefore following and reading continuously until you complete becomes possible and also easy. The characteristics of narrative texts are enumerated below. And therefore, one of the characteristics is that such kind of texts are normally extremely informal in nature, or they contain an informal style. And therefore, the language may not be very official, it may not be very formal. Like we've already said, the second characteristic is that they follow a storyline, starting with a background and all the way up to a climax of the story. A characteristic of a good narrative is that it keeps the reader in suspense. Being in suspense means you cannot very easily guess what is going to happen at the end of the item that you are reading. And then, due to its nature of being story-like, narrations usually are sequential in order, and normally they do not contain any form of explanation. And usually in such texts, the content may not necessarily be true. Mostly it can be made up or created. So most of the narrative texts are usually creations of the authors, of the people who have written them. Now, when you are selecting sources of material for reading, one of the things that you should consider is the validity of the material. Validity will be determined by the correctness of the information in that material. And in academic reading, one of the things that you should always look out for are the dates of the publications. For example, the date when a book was published. If they are very old, then most likely the information in it has been outdated and is no longer practical. In most circumstances, when you are reading for academic purposes, the advice is you look for material that is not more than 5 years. That is, if you need to quote, like if you need to quote information in your own text, then it should not be older than 5 years. Some institutions talk of 3 years. But like in a classroom setup, like where we are referring to theories, we do not put that, we don't restrict, because the theories can be very, very old, but they have not been disputed. Nobody else has come up with a theory to disregard that particular theory. So if it is a theory, however old it is, then we refer to it despite the age or how long ago it was written. You should also be able to evaluate the claims of the author. Like I've talked about the validity of the text that you are reading. So when you are selecting the material, ensure that the author's claims are correct, they are reliable. And then you should also check on the publishers to establish whether they are reputable, especially in the particular discipline. For example, if it is something in education, ensure that the publishers are reputable in publishing any literature to do with education. Then whichever text that you read, you should be able to evaluate it by doing the suggested activities. Like you're supposed to check on the introduction, since that introduction normally gives you the perspective of the author. So you can be able to proceed to read the text or dismiss it if you think it is not worth your reading. Then the other thing you can do is check on the index at the back of the book. The index will give you the key words and the context for each chapter, and therefore by just looking at it, you're able to tell whether it is going to assist you and whether it contains the information that you require. Then also make a habit of reading the opening and the closing paragraphs. Any headings are important because they tell you what to expect in the content, the subheadings also, and also the opening sentences of all of the paragraphs. Now we have a major item in academic writing and reading, which is referencing. Usually when we are writing, we do borrow a lot from people who have written before us. And usually when we borrow information, we are supposed to cite or to mention the source of the information. And then we are supposed to indicate the details of the material, like the details of textbooks, the details of journals, or the details of journal articles. So referencing simply means acknowledging the source of quoted ideas that we are using in our own writing. And the reason for doing that, one of them is that it is unethical to use material that belongs to somebody else, or to use ideas that have been put down by somebody else and assume that they are ours. So doing that is like stealing, and it is referred to as plagiarism. And then the other reason why we reference is because quoting the opinions of the respected in the field, it normally validates our own work. So if for example you quote very strong writers, then your work becomes more credible. And also referencing enables us, it enables our readers to follow up any points that may be of interest. For example, if you just quote a sentence or two from a writer and then you indicate who the source is, then a reader who is very interested will go and look for that material and now read further. So that is it for that chapter or that week's content. As usual, we have the revision questions. Go through them like I've always advised, so that we can be able to gauge our understanding of the topic. Thank you. You can proceed to week 10.